Man. Andrew Jackson the man. Okay, interesting fellow. I think you'll enjoy him. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about Andrew Jackson the man. Now, Andrew Jackson is this fellow right here. Very distinguished fellow. And we'll talk about that later. One of our most interesting presidents. But he had an interesting growing up as well and life before the presidency, and that's what we're going to concentrate on for this test material. Andrew Jackson was actually born on the Carolina frontier in 1767. Andrew Jackson was born on the Carolina frontier in 1767. And his parents had immigrated to the United States from Northern Ireland. So he's Irish. So Andrew Jackson was born on the Carolina frontier in 1767, and he was the son of immigrant parents from Northern Ireland. Like a lot of young kids during this time in history, Jackson grew up with basically no formal schooling. Okay, he didn't go to school like you guys did, you know, from kindergarten through where you're at today. He grew up with no formal schooling, which was the case in a lot of children that lived, especially on the frontier. Well, he was kind of made fun of when he was a young child. He couldn't spell very well, and he wore really odd, what they called backwoods clothes, kind of like hillbilly type clothing. And he didn't look like everyone else, so they made fun of him. So during his early life, he was made fun of because he could not spell and wore odd backwood clothes. Now, when he grew up, despite the fact that he had no formal schooling, he left the frontier and he moved east with the hopes of becoming a lawyer. That's what he wanted to be. Despite the fact that he had no formal schooling, he left the frontier and moved east with the hopes of becoming a lawyer. Now, in those days, you didn't necessarily go to law school, especially if you didn't have any money. So how else could you become a lawyer if you didn't go to law school? How did you become a lawyer? Kind of. You're close. So what did he do? Very good. That's very good. He went in and studied law under a very famous attorney, a guy by the name of Spruce McKay in North Carolina, on the eastern part of North Carolina. So Jackson leaves the frontier, which is the western part of the Carolinas. He moves east in the Carolinas in the hopes of becoming a lawyer, and he studies law, as Macklin stated, under another famous lawyer. This guy's name was Spruce McKay, and he had a law practice in North Carolina on the East Coast. Well, he did his studies with McKay, became very knowledgeable, and so once he finished those studies and became a lawyer, he moved to Tennessee to start practicing law. He moved to Tennessee. So after learning his trade as a lawyer under the famous Spruce McKay in North Carolina, he finished his studies and moved to Tennessee, where he would begin to practice law. Well, when he went to Tennessee, single guy, he rented a room in a boarding house, which was pretty common in those days. Not real common now, right? You knew one of the most famous people that were residents of a boarding house in 1963 was? Lived in a boarding house, separated from his wife. Lee Harvey Oswald. And when you rent a boarding house, a room in a boarding house, it's basically someone's home, and you rent one of the rooms in it for so much money. Okay, and that's what he did. So after he studied with Spruce McKay, he moved to Tennessee to practice law, and he rented a room in a boarding house. Well, there was a lady who owned the boarding house, and Andrew Jackson fell in love with her daughter while he was living there. So during the time he lived in this boarding house in Tennessee, Andrew Jackson fell in love with the daughter of the woman who owned the boarding house. And the daughter's name was Rachel Donaldson Robards. Rachel Donaldson Robards. That was the daughter's name that Andrew Jackson fell in love with. So Jackson fell in love with the daughter of the woman who owned the boarding house there in Tennessee, Rachel Donaldson Robards. Well, Donaldson Robards was a very attractive young lady, very well educated, and she spoke her own mind, which really Andrew Jackson liked about her. He liked the fact that she was pretty, of course. He liked the fact that she was well educated, but he really liked the fact that she would speak her mind. Okay? He liked that about her. And he fell in love with her. But their relationship became kind of an issue right away. Anybody want to know why?
Because he was living in that place in
Look at the name. She was married. She was married. Rachel Donaldson Robards. So their relationship became a big issue immediately as she was married. Well, she was in a very bad marriage. Her husband was very verbally abusive. And because of that, she decided to get away from him. And in 1790, she moved to present-day Mississippi, which was actually Spanish-owned Mississippi, and did not obviously take her husband with her. So to get away from the abuse and the bad marriage, Rachel Donaldson Robards moved to Spanish-owned Mississippi in 1790 without her husband. But Andrew Jackson was a frequent visitor there. He was a frequent visitor, however. So in 1790, she moves to Spanish-owned Mississippi, which is present-day Mississippi owned by the Spanish, without her husband to get away from the bad marriage and the abuse. And Andrew Jackson was a frequent visitor there. So in 1791, claiming that Rachel's husband had divorced her, they married. So in 1791, claiming that Rachel's husband divorced her, they married. Now this was kind of controversial, this marriage, because at that time in history, guess who the only person that could legally marry a couple was? What type? Priest. Catholic priest at the time was the only one that could legally marry a couple. Did a Catholic priest marry those two? No. So there was a little bit of controversy about the marriage, because at the time in history only a Catholic priest could legally marry a couple, and that wasn't the case. So got a little controversy. Was she divorced? Was she really officially remarried? Well, after their marriage, they moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where the two bought a small plantation, including 15 slaves. So after their marriage, in 1791, Andrew and Rachel Jackson moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where they bought a small plantation with 15 slaves. Everything was looking real good until 1793, when Rachel's first husband claimed that he did not divorce her. Claimed he didn't divorce her. In 1793, he comes public and says that he did not divorce Rachel. And when you are involved with another man during the time that you're married in 1793, what do they call you? Nicely. An adulteress. Very good. So what happened is in 1793, Rachel's first husband claimed he did not divorce her and then accused her of adultery. And adultery is when you break your wedding vows and are with another person when you're married. Well, this is kind of an interesting story, because also in those days, if you publicly claimed adultery on your spouse, that made you divorced legally, boom, as soon as you say it. So when he came out and said in 1793 that he did not divorce her and then said she was an adulteress, by law, when he stated that publicly, the divorce was final. So he kind of cut off his nose to spite his face. You see what I'm saying? So as soon as he made that public claim of adultery on Rachel, the divorce was legal. So what did Rachel and Andrew do? Married again. This time in a legal ceremony in Tennessee. So as soon as Rachel's first husband claimed that he did not divorce her, but then went public and said that she had committed adultery, the divorce became legal, and they married again, this time in a legal ceremony in Tennessee. Now that seems all hunky, stinking dory, pretty great, but what is the bad thing about that for Rachel? She carries the bad name, and people are going to remember that, which we'll get to in a bit. Well, Jackson's life as a plantation owner didn't last very long. It didn't really interest him. So what did he do? He entered politics. So he really didn't care that much about the plantation work. Didn't really suit him. And so he decided to enter politics. Well, in 1796, at the age of 29, Jackson was appointed to the U.S. House of Representatives. Representing which state, by the way? Tennessee. So in 1796, at the age of 29, he was appointed to the U.S. House of Representatives. And he served that appointment for 1 year. Then what did he do? Went to the Senate. And he only spent 1 year in the Senate, got tired of it, quit, and went back to Nashville. So he enters politics in 1796 at the age of 29. He's appointed to the U.S. House of Representatives from Tennessee. He serves out the rest of that term and then gets elected to the Senate, but only served in the Senate 1 year and returned to Nashville. Why do you think he left the Congress? Why did he leave the Senate? Do you have any idea? Historians say he left because he did not have a legislative personality. He did not have a legislative personality. What would that mean, do you think, Paris, if he doesn't have a legislative personality? Well, he didn't mind coming up with laws and stuff, but if you're going to be in the legislature, what do you got to be able to do? Wait, he spoke okay, but what else do you have to do? Compromise. And you have to be able to play well with others if you're in Congress. And Jackson was not very good at that. That was not his personality. Did not play with others well. He was kind of the guy that very strong-willed and wasn't willing to negotiate much. So the reason for his leaving Congress is he did not have that legislative personality. And in the legislature, you need to play well with others, and that was not his personality. Well, at the age of 31, he became a circuit judge in Tennessee's Superior Court. Okay, he became circuit judge in Tennessee's Superior Court. And as the years passed, as he served as a circuit judge in Tennessee's Superior Court, he became gained more and more respect from the people of that state, and he became so popular that the state appointed him Major General of the Tennessee Militia. So at the age of 31, he became a circuit judge in Tennessee's Superior Court, and as the years passed in that position, he gained more and more respect from the people of Tennessee, and because of his popularity, he was appointed Major General of Tennessee's Volunteer Militia. Well, he got kind of tired of that, and in 1804, he resigned from that Superior Court, and he moved back to his plantation. So in 1804, after serving, a few years, as district judge in Tennessee's Superior Court, he then moves back to the plantation, and he kind of got more involved. He started to oversee the general operations, and he also was overseeing the whiskey distilleries that he had on the plantation. So he was growing crops and producing whiskey. So back on the plantation, Jackson began to oversee general operations better and his whiskey distilleries. They were a whiskey making plantation. So they're growing a lot of what? Corn. Yeah. Okay. Now, during this time, he really got a passion for the raising and breeding of racehorses. He got into the racehorse business. Okay? He really got into that during the second stint on the plantation. He really got a passion for the raising and breeding of racehorses. I mean, he really gets into it. He gets into it so much that it's going to lead a little bit to a duel. He's going to have a duel here pretty soon. A little fairer than the one I was involved in, but we'll talk about that. So tomorrow we're going to tell you about his passion for horse racing and how his passion got him into a duel with another individual. Okay? And we'll continue that tomorrow.